when I was in college. I had to commute almost 2 hours every day just to get home. My college was on the other side of the city, and there wasn't really a convenient way around it. So every morning, I'd leave early, spend the entire day at college, and then make the long trip back in the evening. I'd gotten used to it. Most days were completely uneventful. But one evening, something happened that made me afraid to come home alone for a very long time. It was around 6:30 p.m. when I got off the bus near my neighborhood. I was tired and hungry, and I still had another 10-minute walk before reaching my house. On the way, I noticed a small confectionery shop that I sometimes stopped at. I went inside because I wanted some chocolate. The shop was almost empty. The owner was standing behind the counter, and I was looking through the shelves when I suddenly got this strange feeling, like someone was watching me. I looked toward the entrance. There was a man standing outside. He was wearing a dark jacket and a mask that covered most of his face. He wasn't looking at the shopkeeper. He wasn't looking at his phone. He was staring directly at me. I looked away. Then I looked back. He was still there, still staring. I remember feeling a chill run through me. I paid for the chocolate and walked out. The man didn't follow me. At least, I didn't see him follow me. I kept looking behind me during the walk home. Nothing. When I reached my house, I locked the front door behind me. My parents weren't home that evening. They had gone out to visit relatives and told me they'd be back later. I was used to being alone for a few hours, so I didn't think much about it. I changed clothes, ate something, and went to my room. For a while, everything felt normal. Then, sometime around midnight, I heard 3 knocks. Knock, knock, knock. They came from my bedroom window. I froze. My room was on the first floor. There was no balcony outside the window. I slowly got out of bed. I walked toward the window and looked through the glass. Nothing, just darkness. I pulled the curtain aside. Nobody was there. I opened the window slightly and looked down. The ground below was empty. I closed it and locked it. I told myself it was probably a branch, but there were no trees close enough to reach my window. I went back to bed. Maybe 20 minutes later, I heard a loud crash from the kitchen. I sat straight up. For a few seconds, I didn't move. Then I heard something fall again. My first thought was that my parents had come home. I called out, "Mom." No answer. I grabbed my phone. There was no message from either of them. Then I heard footsteps coming from the kitchen. Slow footsteps, one after another. Someone was walking through the house. I got out of bed and locked my bedroom door. I stood there listening. The footsteps continued down the hallway. Slowly, closer. Then they stopped outside my room. I could hear someone breathing on the other side of the door. I covered my mouth. I didn't want them to know I was there. Then came a knock. One knock, followed by a quiet laugh. It wasn't a normal laugh. It was high-pitched and strange, almost playful. Then the person outside whispered something I couldn't understand. I grabbed my phone and called my parents. My mother answered immediately. I whispered that someone was inside the house. She told me to lock my door and call the police. I was already doing it before the emergency operator could answer. The person outside suddenly slammed into my bedroom door. I screamed. The entire door shook. Another hit, then another. I could hear the wood cracking. The person started laughing again. That same horrible laugh. I backed away from the door. My hands were shaking so badly that I almost dropped my phone. I looked around my room. There was nowhere to hide. Then I remembered the window. It was my only way out. I opened it. The drop wasn't extremely high, but it was enough to seriously hurt myself. I climbed onto the windowsill. Behind me, the door shook again. The latch was starting to come loose. I looked down. Then I heard a loud bang. Not the door. A gunshot. The person outside my room suddenly stopped. Another shot followed. Then silence. I stayed frozen by the window. A few seconds later, I heard my neighbor shouting from outside. "Police, don't move." I didn't know until later that my neighbor was actually a police officer. He had heard the noise from his house and realized something was wrong. He had come outside with his service weapon. I climbed back down from the window. My neighbor entered the house and found the man in the hallway. The police arrived shortly afterward. They arrested him outside my bedroom, and when they removed his mask, I recognized him immediately. It was the same man I'd seen earlier that evening outside the confectionery shop. The same man who had been staring at me. Police searched him and found several disturbing items. They also searched his vehicle. What they discovered there made the entire situation even worse. He had been watching people in the neighborhood for some time. According to the police, he had a history of violent behavior and previous charges involving the exploitation of minors. They also found photographs and personal information belonging to several people, including me. He had apparently followed me from the confectionery shop. He knew where I lived, and he had been waiting until I was alone. I kept thinking about the 3 knocks on my window. He must have been outside my house before he entered. He had probably been watching me through the window. I don't know how long he'd been there. The police later told me that the man had a distinctive scar around his mouth that made his smile look unnaturally wide. That's why, when he laughed outside my bedroom door, it sounded so strange. I never saw him without the mask that night, but I still remember his eyes from the shop, because even before he entered my house, he had already chosen me. For weeks afterward, I couldn't sleep without checking my window. I'd lock it, check it again, then check the bedroom door. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night convinced I could hear those 3 knocks again. Knock, 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 but they never came. And eventually, I stopped commuting alone at night. Not because I was afraid of the city. I was afraid of something much simpler. Someone seeing me, following me, and waiting until I was finally alone. I've always loved traveling, especially traveling alone. There's something exciting about arriving somewhere you've never been before and knowing you have an entire place to explore on your own. Last winter, I decided to take a solo trip to Thailand. I wanted somewhere warm, and Bangkok had been on my list for a long time. The flight was almost 8 hours. I had a window seat, and because the flight was at night, I was hoping to sleep most of the way. That's when I noticed him. He was sitting across the aisle from me. A bald man, maybe in his 40s, a little overweight, wearing a dark jacket. Nothing about him looked particularly unusual, except for the way he looked at me. At one point, our eyes met. He gave me a strange smile. I didn't know how to react, so I gave him a small smile back and looked out the window. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. After the plane took off, I noticed him looking at me several times. Whenever I looked back, he'd quickly turn toward his seat. I tried not to think about it. There were hundreds of people on the plane. Maybe I was imagining things. A few hours into the flight, most of the cabin lights were turned off. I eventually fell asleep. At some point during the night, I woke up. Someone was standing directly in front of me. It was him, the bald man. He was standing in the aisle beside my seat, looking down at me. For a second, I couldn't understand what was happening. We just stared at each other. Then, the moment he realized I was awake, he turned around and walked back toward his seat. I remember thinking it was strange, really strange, but I didn't say anything. I didn't want to cause a scene on a plane. I eventually fell asleep again. When we landed in Bangkok, I completely forgot about him. Or at least I tried to. I checked into my hotel, dropped my luggage in my room, and spent most of the day exploring the city. By the time I returned that evening, I was exhausted. I had made a friend during my trip, another traveler I'd met while exploring the city. We decided to hang out in my room for a while before going our separate ways. We were talking, laughing, and going through some of the pictures we'd taken that day. Everything felt completely normal until something happened that I still can't explain. My friend accidentally dropped something on the floor. It was a small object. He bent down and picked it up. The moment he looked at it, his expression changed completely. The smile disappeared from his face. He looked toward the hotel room door, then toward me. I asked him what was wrong. He didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed my wrist. Hard. I thought he was joking at first. I laughed and asked him what he was doing. He didn't laugh. He pulled me toward the door. Then he pushed me into the hallway. Before I could understand what was happening, he stepped back inside, shut the door, and locked it. I stood there completely confused. I asked him to open the door. He didn't. Instead, I heard him making a phone call. He was speaking quickly. I couldn't hear everything, but I heard the words, "Police," and then, "under the bed." That's when I realized he wasn't joking. A few minutes later, hotel staff and police officers arrived. My friend immediately told them there was someone hiding inside the room. They opened the door and searched it. At first, they didn't find anything. Then one of the officers crouched beside the bed. He looked underneath. and suddenly shouted for the others to move back. Someone was underneath there, the bald man from my flight, the same man I'd seen standing beside my seat during the flight. He had apparently followed me from the airport to my hotel, and he'd been hiding under my bed. The police pulled him out. He was carrying a large knife. They also found drugs and several syringes among his belongings. I remember standing in the hallway, completely frozen. I kept thinking about how long he'd been there. How long had he been watching me? Had he entered my room while I was out? Had he been there before I came back? I still don't know. The police later told me the man was already wanted in connection with several serious crimes. They believed he'd been following me since the flight. Apparently, my friend had recognized something the man had dropped or left behind earlier. That's what made him suspicious enough to check underneath the bed. I don't know what would have happened if he hadn't noticed it. Maybe the man would have attacked me. Maybe he was waiting for me to fall asleep. Maybe he had been hiding there for hours. I don't want to imagine the possibilities. What scares me most is that I had actually seen him before. On the airplane, he had been sitting only a few seats away from me. And when I woke up during the flight, he was standing right in front of me. I thought he had simply been walking through the aisle. I thought I was being paranoid. I never imagined that same man would be hiding underneath my bed hours later. I finished the rest of my trip, but I wasn't able to enjoy it. Every time I entered a hotel room, I checked underneath the bed first, then the closet, then the bathroom. I barely slept, and when I finally returned home, I stopped traveling alone for a long time. I still love traveling, but I don't think I'll ever forget what it felt like to realize that someone I'd noticed on an airplane had followed me all the way to my hotel and had been lying underneath my bed, waiting for me to come back. I was a streamer for almost 3 years. I wasn't famous or anything. I usually had around 100 viewers whenever I went live, and I was perfectly happy with that. Most of my streams were video games. Sometimes I'd play for 3 or 4 hours, talk to my chat, and occasionally read donations while I played. Over time, I started recognizing the same usernames. One of them was the Dusky Wolf. He had been watching me almost from the beginning. He subscribed regularly, donated often, and always left messages with his donations. They were usually harmless things. Keep going, you're doing great. Best streamer on the site. Hope you're having a good day. I appreciated having regular viewers like him. Eventually, I started recognizing his messages before I even saw his username. But there was one thing I never did with my audience. I never shared much about my private life. I didn't tell them where I lived. I didn't show the outside of my house. I didn't talk about my family. And I especially didn't talk about relationships. I wanted streaming to remain separate from my personal life. Then I started dating someone. My boyfriend knew about my streaming, but he wasn't involved in it. I kept our relationship private for several months. Then one afternoon, I was doing an IRL stream. It was supposed to be a casual stream. I was walking around, talking to my viewers, and answering questions. At some point, my boyfriend walked into the room. I introduced him. It wasn't planned. I didn't think much of it. But apparently, someone in my audience did. That evening, the Dusky Wolf donated again. Except this time, the message was completely different. It said, "So you lied to us." Then another donation appeared. "I thought I meant more to you than this." I laughed nervously because I didn't really understand what he meant. Then another message appeared. "How could you do this to me?" My moderators immediately noticed. They timed him out. A few seconds later, he created another account. Then another. Eventually, my moderators banned him completely. I remember feeling uncomfortable, but I didn't think much of it. I assumed he was just an angry viewer. I was wrong. 2 days later, I finished a late-night stream. It was around 1 a.m. I shut down my computer, turned off the lights in my room, and went to the bathroom to get ready for bed. I had barely been in there for a minute when I heard something. A loud crash. It came from my bedroom. I froze. For a moment, I thought something had fallen. Then I heard a voice. A man's voice. He was shouting. I slowly opened the bathroom door. I looked into my bedroom. A man was standing there. I had never seen him before. He looked like he was in his 20s. Heavy-set, messy hair, dark clothes, and he was holding an axe. I couldn't breathe. He was standing beside my desk. My streaming setup was still there. My monitor was on. He looked toward the bathroom. Then he started shouting, "You betrayed me." I backed into the bathroom and locked the door. He slammed his hand against it. I grabbed my phone. My hands were shaking so badly that I almost dropped it. I texted my boyfriend, "Someone is inside my house." Then I sent him my location. The man outside the bathroom kept shouting. He said I'd embarrassed him. He said I had made him believe I cared about him. Then he started hitting the door. I backed away and climbed into the small closet inside the bathroom. I pulled the door almost completely shut. Then I turned off my phone screen. I could hear him breathing outside. Then silence. I covered my mouth and tried not to make a sound. A few seconds later, I heard him say my name. He knew exactly where I was. The bathroom door suddenly cracked. He hit it again and again. Finally, the door gave way. I could see his shadow moving across the bathroom floor through the gap in the closet. He stepped inside. I could hear him searching. He opened the cabinet, then the shower curtain. Then he stopped. I could hear his breathing. He was standing only a few feet away from me. I squeezed my eyes shut. I thought he was going to open the closet. Then I heard something. A loud impact. Thud. The man's body hit the floor. Everything became silent. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. Then someone grabbed the closet door. I almost screamed. It opened. My boyfriend was standing there. He had gotten to my house as quickly as he could. He had found the intruder in the bathroom and knocked him unconscious with a baseball bat. I ran straight into his arms. I couldn't stop shaking. He called the police while I stayed behind him. officers arrived a few minutes later. The man was arrested. Police searched the house and discovered that he'd apparently been watching my streams for months. He had collected information about me from things I'd accidentally revealed during streams. Small details, places I'd mentioned, my routine, and eventually he'd figured out where I lived. The police later confirmed that he was the Dusky Wolf, the same viewer who had been donating to me for months, the same person I'd thought was just a loyal supporter. They also discovered that he had been struggling with serious psychological issues and had developed an unhealthy obsession with me. But that didn't make what he did any less terrifying. He had crossed a line from being a viewer into becoming someone who believed he had a personal relationship with me, a relationship that had only existed in his head. He was eventually placed into psychiatric care while the legal case continued. I stopped streaming for several weeks afterward. When I eventually returned, I changed almost everything. I stopped mentioning my daily routine. I stopped showing recognizable locations. I made sure my windows couldn't be seen on camera. And I became much more careful about what I shared with strangers online. Because before that night, I thought the biggest danger of being a streamer was getting a rude comment. I never imagined that someone watching me through a screen every night could start believing they actually knew me. And the worst part, when I looked through my old streams afterward, I realized how much information I'd accidentally given away. I had never told the Dusky Wolf where I lived. I didn't have to. I'd shown him enough pieces of my life, and he had put them together himself.